Backstage again at the 2015 Iowa City Jazz Festival, and we have Rudresh Mahanthappa, who's going to be playing here in just a few minutes on the main stage. Welcome to Iowa, sir.
Thank you. It's nice to be here.
Great to have you here. Have you been to Iowa before?
I've driven through. I grew up in Colorado, and sometimes I would drive from Boulder to New York. So
oh, wow.
I would always try to make it as far as Des Moines in one day if I could.
That trek across Nebraska is hard, isn't it?
It's very hard, visually, psychologically.
Oh man! Hey, congratulations on the Downbeat Critics Poll. I think you were Album of the Year with Bird Calls. You are the Alto Saxophonist of the Year. You are Rising Star for Composer. How does that make you feel?
Well, it's definitely a good feeling. We're calling it the Triple Crown. So, that sort of recognition is always great. And I have to say that, what year is this? 2015. I would say, 10, 12 years ago, I never imagined that, I would be accepted and embraced by a larger jazz community. I always thought I would just dangle out there on the fringe and do what I do. And I always tell this story that the first time I ever just made it into the list on the polls for like Rising Star or Alto Saxophone or something, or they used to call it talent deserving wider recognition back then. And I remember, and I laugh about it, so you can laugh about it too. But I was so broke, I had to borrow $5 from my girlfriend to go buy the magazine at Barnes and Noble. So, to think about the whole trajectory is really is very special and inspiring for me.
It's interesting. You were listening to some of the same stuff I was listening to when I was growing up. The Sanborn, the Brecker Brothers.
Oh yeah,
the
great
Weather
music.
Report and all that, which also led me to John Coltrane eventually. I don't know how I made that transition, but you made that as well. But obviously you've gone on to many other things. And starting with some of your work at Berkeley, you were introduced to the music of Kadri Gopalnath.
Yes.
Is that right?
Yeah, Kadri Gopalnath, yeah.
Gopalnath. And is it Carnatic music?
Right. So it's South Indian classical music.
Which has been kind of an integral part of some of your projects anyway. Can you explain briefly what Carnatic, what that's all about? I know you did a project with him in 2008 called Kinsman.
Right. Yeah, that was a very special project. That Carnatic music is it's ancient music. And it's funny because jazz is so young and Carnatic music is so old, but there's so many common energies. The way improvisation occurs and the interaction and the rhythmic propulsion. When I hear South Indian percussion, I hear Max Roach in that, and vice versa. So I hear Jack DeJohnette. So in working with that music, it was about trying to draw interesting through lines and interesting collaborations, but not sell either side of the equation short. Not bastardizing jazz and not exoticizing Indian music, and really trying to create something that is neither and both, and ends up defying genre altogether. And I think at this point that's what it means to truly make American music.
And you got actually a Guggenheim Fellowship. Did you go to India to study that music?
I did, yeah, and that led to a different project called Samdi, and that was again a sort of abstraction where I was very much concentrating on specific aspects of melody and rhythm, but then grafting those onto an ensemble that is more like Weather Report, electric bass, electric guitar, drums, and I was doing a lot of live electronics processing as well, and but still with this strong current of Carnatic music and this really ancient tradition. So, yeah, that music's been very meaningful to me, and it's a way of addressing my culture and my ancestry. As children of immigrants, we all end up in a situation where we're trying to define our identities to different degrees, and a lot of our environment and circumstance dictates that for us. And growing up in Boulder, Colorado, I didn't grow up around a lot of Indians, and certainly not many South Indians, and my parents were speaking mainly English at home, and but I guess this is the way I speak my parents' language.
Yeah, the Samdi was our first introduction to your music. It was really good. We really
Oh,
enjoyed
cool.
that a few
Thank
years
you.
back. Yeah. Some other projects you've done over the years. Talk a little bit about Raw Materials with Vijay Iyer.
Yeah, raw materials. So, Vijay and I actually, I was thinking about it today. I think like right around now is like our 20th anniversary of playing together. I think we've been playing together a long time, and really primarily as a duo. That's how we started. Vijay's a brother. He's like, I think the music is almost secondary. I mean, the ways we relate and the connections that we've developed and the things that we've nurtured artistically and personally together go far beyond the music that comes out. Um, but Steve Coleman introduced us back in 1994, I think, and we were both fascinated that there was another Indian guy trying to play jazz, and that we were interested in similar types of jazz, and we're thinking about very similar things, and so that bond was forged very quickly. We only did this one album, self-titled album called Raw Materials in 2006, but I think these things come around, and I've been doing a lot of stuff that doesn't involve piano, and he's been focusing more on trio stuff, but we do have a duo gig in 3 weeks, and we haven't had one, and we do maybe one or two a year, but they're always very special, and I look forward to that.
Yeah, his last trio project is really nice too.
Yeah, definitely.
Also, Indo-Pak Coalition with Reza Bassi, who, speaking of jazz fusion, he had this great disc last year of his take on all those 60s and 70s fusion tunes, and that was really fun.
Yeah.
What was Indo-Pak Coalition all about?
That was a cool album he did. That was actually initially an experiment I started when I lived back in Chicago in the mid-'90s, and I wanted to play with this idea of a trio with tabla and guitar, and that first attempt back then was really completely and wholly failed. I mean, it was really, it sounded terrible. It sounded very exoticized, and it just didn't feel right. And the reason for that was I don't think I was coming at the project with enough knowledge about jazz or Indian music, and I was kind of maybe trying to create something that sounded like a horrible watered-down version of like Mahavishnu or Shakti or something.
Yeah.
So when I moved to New York and I got to know Rez and Dan Weiss, a great tabla player and great drummer, it seemed worthwhile to try to start that project again, and it turned out great. And we actually are planning on regrouping and making another album next year.
Great.
So I'm excited about that too. Yeah.
Talk about your work with this gentleman. I guess is kind of would be considered a jazz master in some instances. Bunky Green.
Yeah, Bunky Green is definitely a jazz master.
Yeah.
Bunky's very special to me. I first heard an album of his when I was at Berkeley in like 1991. An album called Places We've Never Been with Freddie Waits and Eddie Gomez, Randy Brecker. I don't remember who's playing piano. It's an amazing album. It finally came out on iTunes a few years ago. It was very hard to find. And I was so taken with what he was playing because I felt like he was playing things that I was thinking about but couldn't execute yet. But I also heard the great tradition of jazz. I heard Charlie Parker and what he did. I heard Sonny Stitt. I heard all these... I heard that integration, and I was so taken with it. I tracked him down and I called him, and just said, "You don't know who I am, but I just heard this album, and I think it's mind blowing. Can I send you a cassette of some of the stuff I'm doing?" And I did, and he called me back, and he was, very, he was inspiring. I mean, I wasn't playing particularly great back then, but he was very encouraging. And then we kept kind of crossing paths over the years with the Jazz Educators Conference and stuff like that. And one time I was playing at that conference with a big band, and I had a bunch of solo space, and I convinced him to come see me play. And when I got off the stage, he was waiting for me. He gave me a huge hug, and he said, and I take this with a grain of salt, but it was very flattering at the time. He said, "There are only 4 of us." He said, "There's me and you and Greg Osby and Steve Coleman, and somehow we have to take the alto saxophone into the future."
Wow.
So that was a very ringing endorsement.
Yeah, no pressure.
No pressure, right? And we always talked about doing something together, and finally the stars aligned in a particular way that it became possible. And so we started concocting this project, and I was playing with Jack DeJohnette at the time. I said, "Hey, I'm doing this thing with Bunky Green." He said, "Well, I want to be on that." I said, "Okay." And then I told Jason Moran the same thing. He said, "Well, I want to be on that too." So the band came together, and Francois Moutin, who's playing with me tonight, is on the album as well. And I really think it was important for Bunky's voice to get out there, because he hasn't made many albums,
Right.
and they've all kind of flown under the radar. And that album got a lot of attention, and just to know that Bunky finally got on the cover of Downbeat is very important, very important to me, and very important period. So, yeah.
Another jazz master you had a brief encounter with at one point was Ornette Coleman when you were at Tower Records one time, and I think you gave him one of your discs, and
I
you said
did.
you never heard back from him
I
about
never,
it.
I
But
never did hear back from it, but it was great. You know, I enjoyed that hour that we got to hang out, and yeah, that was a very funny thing because it was Vijay and I were doing a signing at the Tower Records booth at the Jazz Educators Conference, and Ornette had just done one for Sound Grammar that was completely mobbed. There were hundreds and hundreds of people there to get his autograph, and then that cleared, and me and Vijay sat there alone at this table, but Ornette hung out with us the whole time and shared a lot of his perspectives on music and improvisation
and you played it a tribute to him just a couple, was it the Blue Note last week after his
yeah, that
passing?
was.
How did
Yeah.
you get involved with that?
That was a very last minute thing. You know, Gato Barbieri was actually supposed to play that night, and he had canceled a few days before. So the guys at the Blue Note decided this would be something worth doing, and David Liebman was kind of leading the charge. He had done an album of Ornette tunes a few years ago, and he kind of reworked some of those for us. And that was a great band too. Scott Colley was playing bass, and Nasheet Waits was playing drums, and a young but very brilliant pianist named Bobby Avey was playing as well. And it was great, you know. And I realized I've known Liebman for so many years, but we've never actually played a gig together. So that was really fun.
Had you gotten into Ornette's music at all much over the years, or?
Yeah, definitely. I was a big Ornette head in college. And I've actually been trying to find this flyer. I did a recital at Berkeley of all Ornette tunes. And that was one of these things at school where your recital would have a title. And mine was like very cheesily called Ornette or Not. And the posters were great because it was like, I had this friend that worked at Kinko's that could just like do all this magic that it was easy to do in Photoshop now, but we would sit there for hours and try to figure out how to do So it's like this horrible photo of me. No, it was a great picture of Ornette in profile. This horrible photo of me wearing a crappy suit that I was sending around to try to get a gig on a cruise ship, you know. So it's really like Ornette or Not, you know. But that was a really fun project. I wish I could find those charts. We just moved, so I don't know which box they're in. But, you know, even beyond the regular stuff, the more famous things, you know, it was really fun to get into you know, the Live at the Golden Circle albums. You know, people don't talk about those albums enough, I think.
Sure.
And, you know, people don't talk about science fiction enough. People don't talk about Skies of America enough, for that matter, you know. So
I bet you've never played a wide alto sax, have you? A plastic sax.
I would love to find one. I don't know if I could find one. But I remember seeing the cover of Shape of Jazz to Come when I was in junior high and being
wow.
absolutely, you know, taken with it.
What is this?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, I loved it.
We'll talk about your recent project. We're chatting with Rudresh Mahanthappa, who is going to be at the Iowa City Jazz Festival main stage here in mere minutes. Bird Calls is the new project. You obviously had picked up on Charlie Parker's music early in your career back in the day when, I don't know how early that was, but at one point you picked up on it and have done this project influenced by the music or inspired by the music, but it's not his music per se. Why don't you explain?
Yeah,
the Bird
it
Calls?
isn't his music. Yeah, Charlie Parker is very special to me. I mean, I think I started listening to him when I was in 6th or 7th grade. And I have to say, all these things I talk about that go back so far, it's not like, I mean, I was trying to discover stuff, but I had a really amazing teacher that introduced me to a lot of things. So, you know, I'm grateful to him.
Mhm.
But, you know, I think the most important way, the best way we can ever pay tribute to somebody is not to necessarily to do what they did, but to show what we learned from them. And, you know, I think you can probably hear Now's the Time or Billy's Bounce at 20 different places in the world, you know, every night of the year, you know.
Mhm.
And it's not important to me to do that. And I think other people might even do that better than me. But, you know, there are all these nuggets of wisdom, of musical wisdom and things that Bird played and things that Bird wrote. And what I really wanted to do for this album was to mine those and create new music around them, which is essentially is a demonstration of how modern what he did was, you know, even though it was in the 40s, that the tools are incredibly modern, and a lot of music would not have happened without Charlie Parker. And I think it's, you know, it's easy to forget that when you put on a scratchy record and hear this thing that seems so period specific. Because it's not period specific. It's actually quite eternal and and temporally fluid.
And the guys you were working with on the disc, had you been working with them before, and did you have to pick out the right people to come up with this particular project in order to make it happen?
Well, I think the latter is always the case. I've always felt that half the battle of composing is figuring out who you're composing for. And I think with everything I've done, and especially in the last 10 years, I've been writing for individual people and not just the instrument. I'm not writing for piano. I'm writing for Matt Mitchell. So I hadn't worked with them in this configuration, but I'd worked with them in lots of other ways. Matt used to sub on the Bunky Green project. Rudy Royston I've actually known since 1990. He's a fellow Colorado guy.
Oh, okay. Yeah, sure.
And Francois Moutin, I met like my third week in New York, and we've been playing together ever since. Adam O'Farrell's the relatively new one to me. It was important for me to have a trumpet player in this group. I wanted to evoke that front line that Bird had, whether it was with Miles or Dizzy or or even Al Hurt or Herb Pomeroy or any number of trumpet players.
Red Rodney, I think, was
yeah,
with
exactly right. There was a particular charisma and momentum to that front line, regardless of who it was. And so I just started asking around, who are some young trumpet players that are playing really well and kind of thinking outside of the box. And Adam's name kept coming up, and so I just went to YouTube and watched some videos. And it's funny because they were actually like audition videos for competitions, and it was mind-blowing. I mean, he was just playing so well that, and he's been perfect. He's been perfect for the group. His energy as a musician and as a person is very welcome. And yeah, he's I don't like that word prodigy so much, but I think he might be a prodigy, and he has great lineage. I mean, to think that his grandfather wrote the Afro-Cuban suite for Charlie Parker. I mean, how could this be more appropriate?
Yeah, really, really. And are these the guys that are with you today then?
Yeah,
Playing with
fortunately,
you?
it
All
was
came
able to,
along?
because that's
Well,
not always
great.
the case.
Right.
But, this time it is the band that's on the album. It is the core band, which is exciting.
So, what are you working on now? What's in the hopper? I know I was reading some things where you had wanted to do some work with a dance company. Have you done anything along those
Oh, I
lines
did
yet?
I did a
Oh, you
large
did?
piece for a dance company.
Okay.
Yeah, that actually premiered almost over a year ago.
Oh, okay.
And we've been touring a lot, especially this spring. And the group for that company is very specific to that piece. It's more South Indian oriented. I mean, Rez is in there, but the rest of it is very South Indian oriented. And then, and that was just has been a really great experience and get inside of the way non-musicians hear music. How other performing artists hear music was really fun. But that is winding down now. We've done a lot.
And then you had mentioned something about wanting to do some children's music. Have you got
Yeah,
anywhere
that's
with
always
that?
in the back of my
Okay.
head, I guess. Yeah, I mean, I think that comes naturally out of having a child. Like, there's some really good children's music out there, and there's a lot of really awful stuff. And I don't, there's only so much wheels on the bus that I can really take. And so I've been thinking about that. Yeah, I don't know if anything's going to come of that. And my son hasn't really helped because he actually wants to listen to, WBGO, like the big jazz station.
Oh, yeah,
and,
yeah.
It's like, no, that's not helping. You're supposed to think about children's music, and we're going to work on this thing together. So he's actually going to be an amazing musician if he sticks with it. He's got some freaky kind of natural things happening. That's one thing I think about. I really want to focus on the Indo-Pac Coalition, the new project with that.
Mm-hmm.
That's going to involve a lot of electronics and live audio processing. It's going to be a very different sounding album than what we made in 2008. And then I've been thinking a lot about chamber music and groups I would like to write for if they'll let me write for them. And I have this, I don't know, I can't quite see it, but I have this idea for some sort of piece with a chamber group, a person doing live video projection, and a comedian. And I can't quite... I feel it. I can't even I don't see it, but I can feel it. I think it's going to take a couple of years to figure out. But I mentioned that in the Downbeat article, and a presenter actually wrote to me last week and said, "So which comedian? Can we talk about this?" I was like, "Really? Like you're going to run with this? Okay." So, yeah, I don't know which comedian yet, but someone I can afford.
Sure, sure. Well, it's great to have you here in Iowa City, and this new project is just it's revelatory as a Charlie Parker fan myself, and I can
Oh, thank you.
I kind of see where you're going with a lot of that stuff, and it's really neat.
Well, thank you. I appreciate that.
A well-deserved Downbeat Critics Poll Album of the Year.
Well, thank
Excellent.
you.
And looking forward to your set here in just a few minutes, and thanks for taking some time out. And having a
Yeah,
chat.
thanks for having me. It's always good to talk. Thanks, Bob.
Rudresh Mahanthappa on KCCK.